Hello, and welcome to A Conversation with Carl. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe for the latest content. I am excited to welcome back Gary Bembridge to discuss summer cruises. Gary is a prominent cruise and travel vlogger, author, and creator of tips for travelers. Based in London and originating from Zimbabwe, he transitioned from a career in global marketing to a full-time travel content creator in 2012. Welcome back, Gary Bembridge, to the conversation.
Great. Well, thanks for having me back. It's good to be back.
Thank you so much for doing this. What are the distinct differences beyond just the hot weather and more kids on board should travelers expect when cruising in the summer?
Yeah, well, I mean, probably one of the biggest and simplest things is destinations. So what happens at around about March, April time is the cruise lines will move most of their ships out of the Caribbean, which is where, the bulk of cruising is. So they'll move a bunch of ships up to Alaska for the summer Alaska season, and they'll move loads and loads of ships across to Europe, mostly to the Mediterranean. So whilst you can still do some cruising in the Caribbean, it's actually dramatically less because the real activity is Mediterranean, Northern Europe, up to places like Iceland, the Norwegian fjords, and of course Alaska, which has basically the same season. That's probably the biggest difference. And also, if you're more into expedition cruising, it's now winter down in Antarctica, so the ships sort of will head up more into the Arctic regions. So northern Greenland, Canadian Arctic, and then Svalbard, etc. So sort of the kind of what you can do dramatically changes. Is one of the biggest differences.
If you're planning to go to Alaska, you wouldn't go in November. You'd have to go in the summer months.
Yeah, so the Alaska season really runs from May to September, and in some cases kind of August. Now, some of the lines are starting to push a little bit at the edges, but really it starts up in May, and the ships stop going there sort of September, a little bit into October. So it's a very concentrated period of time, so, and the same with Europe. I mean, Europe is basically the same, those same months. They're relatively short seasons.
While mega ships like Royal Caribbean and Norwegian are packed with families right now, is there still a strong market for adult-only summer cruises?
Yeah, so there are a couple of, the challenge that people have, so if you want to go on an adult-only cruise, lines that often are less adult tend to be very full of families. So Celebrity, Holland America, those sort of lines, which are often, adult-only. In those summer months, Alaska, Mediterranean will be full of families. So really, if you wanted an adult-only option, you pretty much need to go on adult-only ships. So, in the premium category, you've got Virgin Voyages. They have most of their ships. They have one ship up in Alaska, Brilliant Lady. Most of their ships are now in Europe, so you can do an 18 and over. Then you've got Oceania and a Viking, which are sort of in the luxury space. They're sort of 1,000, 1,200 passengers. Those are adult-only ships as well. If you go ultra-luxury side, you probably will have a mostly adult experience, but not exclusively in the summer months. And some of them, like Explorer Journeys, you can call it into families, still to a lesser degree, but you'll find that it'll be more adults than kids, and it'll tend to be multi-generational families on those. But if you want a true adult experience, Virgin Voyages, Viking, and Oceania. If you're in the UK, you actually have quite a few more options, though. So there are other lines like Ambassador, Marella, sort of adult-only ships. P&O used to have some of their ships adult-only, but they've stopped them in the summer months, and Saga. So actually, in the UK, adult cruises have more options than kind of international. Although, of course, you can book on some of those as an international traveler.
And on Virgin Voyager, I think you have to be over 18.
Yes. Yeah.
That just changes the whole dynamic too, if everyone's
Absolutely.
over 18.
I mean, what's interesting with Virgin Voyages is a lot of people, when Virgin Voyages first came along, they played up the fact they were going to be very different. And a lot of people assumed it was going to be like this young person's cruise line. But it's not. The average age is 55. Now, you do get more, younger people, but also if you just think it through logically, but the fact they're 18 plus, and they're quite expensive as a line because they're a premium line. If a lot of people in their sort of 30s and 40s, maybe even early 50s, have kids and teens, so they can't go. So, might have 20-somethings, but a lot of them are kind of 50s kind of plus. So it didn't end up being what a lot of people thought it was going to be, which is kind of a young people's hip kind of line. It is kind of much more hip and trendy, but it's not packed full of young people, basically.
When I was in my 20s, I thought, I wouldn't want to do a cruise. But now that I'm a little older, I love them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's not the data. The data says something different. The trend is actually quite different. So you're right. The bulk of cruises today tend to be a little bit older because that's the history. However, with the growth of particularly the mega resort lines, so 80% of people who cruise is on 4 cruise lines. So Royal Caribbean, Carnival, MSC, and Norwegian. And those are big kind of resort ships, and they are very geared towards families and kind of young couples. So you're seeing much more groups of young people going, 20-somethings, early 30-something friends, and lots of families because they're targeting families, making quite affordable kind of resort vacations for families. So actually the trend every year is the average age of cruising is getting younger. And on those lines, noticeably so. So if you go on those lines, you're quite surprised at actually how much younger overall, because there's just more families and stuff on that as well.
If parents have a gap between summer camp and the start of school, is a last-minute family cruise realistic, and can they actually find good deals?
Well, finding good deals is less easy these days because cruise ships are sailing over capacity. When over capacity will sound scary, but basically cruise ships measure capacity, and the industry measures capacity based on fixed berths. So it's normally average of 2 people per cabin. So it doesn't really count sofa beds, pull down beds, that kind of stuff. So what's happening now is most cruises are selling out and going over that 100% things because cruising is growing so fast and demand is growing faster than actually even though capacity is coming out. So it's quite challenging to find last minute deals. They still can be found, but it's not as easy as it were, and they're not kind of as deep discount, but you can. But in that sort of period, I guess that sort of August time, that is absolute peak time. You will really struggle to find deals then. You may find them, but it's quite challenging. Also, of course, you're going to be much more limited because if, most activities in Alaska cruises will be sold out. You'll almost never get deals on Alaska. In the Mediterranean, of course, if you're in the US or whatever, you've got all the cost of long haul flights at short notice, which are high. But if you're in Europe, you may be able to jump on some there. If you're in the US, you've still got some Caribbean stuff that you can do, but it's way more challenging to do it in summer last minute.
So, and that goes into my next question. Do classic winter destinations like the Caribbean or Florida, do they offer better value and better discounts during the summer months?
Well, not so much
really.
because you obviously have reduced capacity. There's less capacity. It's if there are the Caribbean in the summer months is because also a lot of people sort of avoid some of the summer months because you're getting into hurricane season. So there can be kind of unpredictable. There could be changes of itineraries. Some people worry about rough. So last year, for example, some cruises that were due to sail out of New York to go down to Bermuda, they ended up going to Canada because there was hurricanes passing through. So people had booked thinking they were going to Caribbean and end up in Canada. so there's a chance of more disruption. But yeah,
because September, October is hurricane season. September, October, November.
And it starts it seems to start sort of earlier, but they would normally say assume sort of that August through to sort of, I guess, November. Sort of October time is when there's a chance. Although I did read something the other day that this year the prediction is for fewer kind of storms developing. I think last year was quite busy. So
yeah, and they're supposed to go around the storms when you get to choppy seas.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, ships. Obviously, the advantage with ships is they can then plan their itineraries and adjust their itineraries. So the point also that I say to people summer's pricing is good because a lot of people don't want to cruise in the risk of hurricane or stormy season, but also that you have to accept that you might not get the itinerary you expect. And of course, under the cruise contract, the cruise line can change itineraries without paying compensation. So you just have to be flexible. But if you're going to the Caribbean, pretty much all the Caribbean islands are great.
Well, there's the cruise that was going to, couldn't get to Turkey and couldn't get to
right, yeah,
and Egypt. And they had 2,000 people on board with Patty LaPone. Did they not know that the ship was coming before?
Yeah. So what happened was it got caught up in kind of politics, I guess, kind of the whole thing. So what happened is it is a Virgin Voyages ship, and it was chartered by Atlantis, which run gay cruises, which are it's mostly gay men cruises. They had run similar itineraries called on Turkey before without any issues. But basically, what happened is Egypt wasn't originally on the itinerary. They had 2 stops in Turkey, Istanbul and Kusadasi were scheduled. Once they were the ship had set sail, the Turkish government decided that they wouldn't accept the ship because the people on the ship didn't align with their morals or values. So they were refused calling there. So they then rescheduled where they added Egypt, which is interesting because Egypt has particularly draconian kind of attitudes towards kind of LGBT people and stuff. But anyway, they chose Egypt. And then the Egyptian authorities, as the ship was due to dock that day, withdrew their ability to call. So they had to then find new ports. And I think they went to Montenegro. I can't remember. I know they went, because I remember it was on the schedule, but following it. So those were sort of, I mean, it's interesting. My point of view would be it's interesting that as a kind of an LGBT chartered cruise, they chose ports or countries that are not known for kind of positive attitudes towards LGBT people. So it was kind of interesting. That's the big debate going on, is should they have chosen an itinerary that was probably going to be less controversial or risky or whatever. It is quite an interesting debate because my partner has a very kind of black and white view on it. So we had a discussion the other day where he wanted to go to the Maldives. And my point is, like, homosexuality is illegal in Maldives, punishable by all sorts of stuff. So it's like, okay, well, it's black and white. Okay, why would you go and spend money in a country that isn't welcoming of you when there's other places you can go which are more welcoming? So it's interesting because even in the Caribbean, up until quite recently, that was an issue on quite a few of the islands.
Jamaica.
Although it was accepted, so quite a few islands it was illegal, and there were penalties, but it wasn't really put in practice. And it was only around about quite late, I think in the 29, something like that. Some of the countries actually changed the laws, but up until then, that was a discussion as around. I think a lot of people aren't that aware, and maybe that's the issue. People are more used to living in countries which are more welcoming, and then don't really think it through. It's the risks and stuff.
Are cabin upgrades easier to get during the high demand summer season, or does high occupancy make them rare?
I mean, upgrades these days are extremely rare because ships are sailing so full. So it's interesting because I actually just was working on a video which is coming out in a couple of weeks around upgrades. So getting upgraded is much less likely overall just because ships are full. Also, cruise lines have moved into seeing it more as a revenue stream. So before, if you had status or whatever, you had more chance of upgrading. But now they increasingly use, bidding for upgrades. So before you go on a cruise, you get an email which says like bid for an upgrade for all the cabins above you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're available, but the idea is even if ships are full, they want all those bids in. So if people cancel last minute or there's no shows close to the sailing, they can start moving people around and basically filling cabins and making more money. It's quite challenging, certainly close or heading into sailing, to get upgrades. Years ago, often when you got on a ship or even when you checked in, you could often get upgrades because you could go to the desk and say, is the ship sailing full? No, it wasn't. What upgrades have you got? Now you'll see pretty much on every ship on the embarkation, there's a sign on the guest services saying the ship is sailing full. Don't come and ask you for upgrades, basically. So it's way more challenging these days to get upgrades. So the best way of getting upgrades, in reality, is other things. So right at the beginning of the booking process, what I do quite a lot is, because I book far ahead, often when cruise lines launch itineraries, they will launch with deals which are pay for this grade, but you'll get it moved to grade higher. So there's other things like that. You're more likely to get upgrades these days than kind of last minute.
Would you always say you should get insurance before you travel?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, for cruise especially, you should get it. I mean, my view is you should get it for all travel, but cruising, it's really important to get insurance. Also, what's critical is a couple of things. One of which, make sure that your cruise policy includes cruise cover. So specifically ask, does it have cruise cover? Because that covers, medical evacuation. So if they have to send a helicopter to medevac you or something like that, that's absolutely critical. So you need to make sure it's got cruise cover, and then you can also claim back if something happens on the ship. But also what I recommend to people is when you book, take out travel insurance, because if you have to cancel, then you can get money back. So in the US, it's a little bit easier because there are some fares which have refundable deposits, but in places like the UK, you can only book a cruise with a non-refundable deposit. So you kind of need insurance, which can help if you have to cancel. But some policies will pay out if you miss a port or a port gets dropped, for example. So insurance is really, really important, but particularly because if you fall ill on a cruise or you have some injury, the medical center will stabilize you, but they will offload you at the next port. And the cruise line basically washes their hands of you. So, they might give you some liaison, but it's pretty much you have to then work your way through the medical system, work out how you're going to get back. So you need insurance absolutely for that.
We hear stories all the time about sickness spreading easily on cruise ships. What are some tips to help us stay healthy during a cruise?
Yeah, I mean the one which people probably worry about the most these days is norovirus. So which is the gastro thing, which people can vomit and have diarrhea and whatever. So the critical thing with the way of avoiding norovirus is a couple of things that I do. One, and the cruise line will tell you this, is constantly wash your hands. So not hand gel, not gel, wash your hands. So every time after the bathroom, before you go into the dining room, just just wash your hands constantly. I mean, they're very strict. So like on Royal Caribbean and stuff, the way it's set up is they will not let you into the buffet, for example, without washing your hands. Others, like I was on Celebrity recently, they just do the hand gel. The hand gel is fine, but it's not as good as washing your hands. The other thing that I do is I actually try and avoid using the buffet as much as possible, particularly if people are serving themselves. So on some lines like Holland America and stuff, the crew serve you. So you haven't got lots of people touching stuff. So I would tend to avoid that. Also, I try to avoid touching lots of spaces that are constantly touched. So elevator buttons, handrails, that kind of stuff. So, but the critical thing is keeping your hands clean is the critical. That's the main thing that people worry about. Um, uh, that's the main kind of illness thing that people worry about.
And then, are there specific cruise destinations that we should avoid during the summer?
Well, ironically, it depends on, but the Mediterranean, I avoid the Mediterranean in summer, in July and August, because it is incredibly hot. I mean, this year in Europe is very hot. I mean, even the UK, we've had 30-degree days. So it's very hot. And in Europe, it's even hotter. But so particularly in Europe, what happens is things close down and everyone goes on holidays. Like in France, they will close down, factories will close down and everyone goes on holiday. Italians do the same. Italy, Spain, Greece, all the places are absolutely packed. So if you can, I actually avoid July and August going to peak places in Europe. But most people can't in reality. But that's so a lot of people, particularly if you really don't like the heat and you don't like crowds. So that what I always say to people, if you are going, it's about choosing excursions very clever, very wisely. Except that if you're going to go, to Civitavecchia for Rome, all those places, the Trevi Fountain, the Parthenon, the Parthenon, the Colosseum and stuff is going to be crazy busy, but you probably want to see it anyway. But it's about choosing kind of excursions if you can. So maybe do things that are less kind of the must-sees, maybe.
And just say you do go to Europe or you're going to Alaska on a cruise. What is your the golden rule for flight scheduling to make sure that you do not miss the ship's departure?
Well, minimum, if I'm going long haul, I will go 2 days before. And I used to, more for Europe, go a day before. However, I actually, in Europe, if you're flying into Europe from the UK, which is now not part of the EU, part of the Schengen zone, or you're coming from the US, Europe have introduced this new system, the EES, the entry-exit system, which is proving to be a nightmare. Huge delays when you come in, huge delays when you go out, because the system just isn't working. Because you have to come in and you have to put in your passport on machines, you have to answer questions, take photographs, fingerprints, and the system is just not really working. And when you leave, you have to kind of go through the process again. So in some places, it's you're being warned it can take up to 5 hours to get through immigration. So, and it's it's very erratic and, hopefully they'll sort it out. But this summer, it's going to be very challenging. Now, I've experienced it a little bit. I've tried to avoid going in and out of Europe. It took me a couple of hours leaving through Rome Airport. So I'm actually heading on a trip which leaves out of Lisbon, and I'm going 2 days before, just building buffer and the hassle and the stress. It's like minimum, get there the day before. Particularly, I would do a day before if I could see there's lots of alternative flights. If I'm flying, say, to Barcelona from London, I will get an early morning Barcelona flight, knowing that there are, I think there's 6 or 7 Barcelona flights every day by British Airways or Iberia or whatever. So I know that if there's a problem with that flight, I'm still going to get there, the day. You never fly in the same day ever. It's people worry about the cost of the hotel, but it's way better than trying to figure out how you get to the next port. And I've been on a cruise, in fact, out of Miami recently, where the departure time was 5 o'clock. But what happens is the check-in closes an hour before the ship departs because of all the immigration and the port stuff. And people had been on a flight which had been delayed from weather. coming out of somewhere in the US, can't remember where. There's a group of about 20 of them. They arrived at 4:10 and they were refused boarding because
Oh,
it was
wow.
closed. So, even if you think you're coming in, you just need more buffer nowadays. It's just
Yeah.
too uncertain.
And then we talked about this about like Europe being very crowded in some places, but some ports can get incredibly crowded when multiple mega ships all docking at once. Is there an insider strategy for escaping the tourist traps and finding a quieter, more authentic experience when you're on shore?
Yeah, and I mean, it varies a lot. It obviously varies a lot based on where you're going. But what I'm seeing increasingly is cruise lines will often uh, offer kind of more out of the way places. So, for example, if you go into Civitavecchia, which is for Rome, or you go into La Spezia, for Florence and Pisa. What I'm seeing now, increasingly, the cruise lines are offering excursions which go to more small, out of the way places you've almost never heard of. They may be going, visiting farms or little out of the way towns. So sometimes looking for those kind of things. The other thing to do is, if you look at something like tours by locals, for example, you can often get, because it's, as the name suggests, it's local people. You can often contact them and say, look, I want to do something when I'm in port that's not going to get me caught up in crowds. What can you do? And they'll often say, well, actually, I could take you to X, Y, and Z, or we can go and do, I know this is a quiet spot where tourists don't hang out, kind of thing. So you can literally get kind of local knowledge. Tours by locals, because it's local independent people, not tour groups, it's often very affordable as well. So it's a cheaper option, and you're getting kind of someone genuinely local. Those are probably the two, simplest things to do.
There's a debate that I always have with people, if you should get the drink package or not get the drink package, the alcohol package, if it's better. And I'm never sure on that. There's a lot of people that think the drink package is worth it. There's a lot of people that say, oh, I'll just get a couple of drinks a night. What do you think on that?
So there's two thoughts I have. One of which is, for some people, they dislike the idea that before they go, it's paid, it's done, and I just hand over my card and it's done. I don't have to worry about it. And I'm not bothered actually whether I get my money's worth or not. I just like the lack of hassle. But there is actually, what I would say to people is work it out, because there are two websites that actually have a little calculator, and they cover most cruise lines. One, and so if you actually Google, because they have bizarrely long URLs, but one is a site called Cruisely, Cruzely. So if you do Cruisely drinks package calculator, or Cruise Mummy drinks package, and that has a little calculator there, and you pick your cruise line. So say you're going on Royal Caribbean, Celebrity, whatever, and you say, okay, how many drinks am I going to have? And you think it through, and you say, this is how much I'm going to have. Because they put in all most recent prices, they will say, it doesn't pay you to get a drinks package because you're never going to get your value, the value. So that I find quite helpful. You can also do a rough judgment call. I mean, I was on a celebrity, I mentioned I was on a celebrity trip, and, I don't drink alcohol, but I like Heineken Zero, and I like, mocktails and coffees and stuff. But I looked at the drinks package and I literally just said, okay, I know that a cup of, a Heineken Zero costs $8 or whatever it costs, plus 20% gratuity. But I was going to have to have drunk 700 and something of those. So it's like, okay, I'm never going to drink 700 coffees in those. So actually, I paid for it, ad hoc, and I spent less than a quarter of that in the end. So you can sort of do a rough judgment call. But if you're not sure, the calculators are great.
And then, with extreme summer heating up, how are cruise lines adjusting to their onboard activities, and what are the best spots on the ship to stay cool and beat the crowds?
I mean, cruise lines will, because it's very easy for them to adapt. So they'll often bring stuff indoors. So if they were planning to do a deck party and it's too hot, they've always got an internal space to do it, and vice versa. So on this last trip I was on, it was the opposite. We were due to have a deck party, but it was just too cold because we were in Iceland, and it was much colder than it is normally. So they just moved it indoors. So they will just move stuff around. So a lot of the stuff they can do outdoors. But in reality, most of the activities are indoors anyway. So a lot of the stuff's happening indoors anyway, because that's where most of the venues are. So I haven't seen them make a lot of changes. But what I have seen, the cruise lines do much more is starting to have, complimentary sunscreen and stuff much more. Before it only used to be on the the luxury lines, but now I'm seeing it much more. They will have it out there, encourage you to do it, to use it kind of stuff.
So, and as we wrap up, is there anything that I should have asked you about summer cruising that I have not?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the only thought is like, if you do want to cruise in summer, plan way ahead, because otherwise that's the only way you're going to get it at the most affordable way with the best choices. It's, because it is such those little short, if you have to go in the school holiday time, if you be planning 28 now because it's already on sale and filling up. So that's what I would encourage, is just think ahead.
Yeah, I think for cruising, you have to book ahead.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to, and I think if you're going to go buy flights, and then let me ask this question too, because while I'm thinking about this, is it better to use, like if you're booking through Celebrity or Royal Caribbean or any of the big ships, they work with the airlines. Is it better to find your ticket by yourself or go through the ship to get your ticket?
So I never book flights through the cruise line for a couple of reasons. One of which is often what you'll find with the cruise lines is they will sometimes give you slightly strange routings, particularly if you're going long haul, or even, I guess in the US. Because you're right, they work with the cruise lines, but they're looking for the cheapest way of getting you there. Like for example, I was going to I was doing a cruise out of Santiago, and they had this very complicated routing with 2 changes. When I know there's 2 direct flights a day that I could use. So I don't, because I like to be more in control of that. But also because I work with a travel agent, the advantage is, so if something goes wrong, so if something goes wrong with the cruise or whatever, I don't have to struggle, be faffing around trying to sort it out myself. So the advantage, of course, of doing this with the cruise line is if something gets cancelled or there's a hiccup, they will sort it out for you. You don't have to do that separately. But if you work through a travel agent and you book all those elements, the travel agent will be the person who has to then figure out how do you do it. Now, in the UK, which is slightly different, I think, maybe in the US, is if you book a series of stuff with a travel agent, it's all protected under what's called ATOL. So if something goes wrong with it, one of those elements gets cancelled or gets wrong, it's kind of covered. So that's the advantage of that. Now, I don't know if this, I think I'm not 100% sure of the system in the US, but the advantage is, if you are booking your own flights, just bear in mind, if you do them yourself, if something goes wrong, you're going to have to sort it out yourself. If you work with a travel agent and it's all bundled, they will sort it out for you. But generally speaking, I prefer to do it myself, because I can choose routing, timings, all sorts.
And then going back to, we were just talking about this. If you book a flight through the cruise and it's delayed, and you get to the ship at 4:10 when the ship's supposed to leave at 5, but they close at 4, are you still? Do they help you, or they're like, I'm sorry, you're just
out of luck? I mean, that's a good point. If you're within their sort of bubble, they are obligated to kind of sort you more. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gary Bembridge, thank you so much for joining me today. The YouTube channel is Tips for Travelers, and you can read all about and listen to all your advice on cruising. Thank you out there for listening today. As always, let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comment section. And until next time, everyone, be safe.